everyone. Welcome to Ren Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi. I'm your host Arinda, and today we're talking about Supergirl with Bob Vosserlaar. Supergirl is an American superhero television series. It is based on the DC Comics character Supergirl. Supergirl is a costume superheroine who is Superman's cousin and one of the last surviving Kryptonians from the planet Krypton. The series is the third series set in the Arrowverse, sharing continuity with the other television series of this franchise. I always have loved this series. I absolutely love Kara, and the storyline is very well written. There are also other characters I like, but the whole superhero thing is very nice to see, and I think for young little girls who was watching this series, but also, for example, seeing Wonder Woman, it's all about girl power, and I think you empower those little girls to and inspire them to do great things. Well, today my guest is Bob Vosserlaar. Hello, Bob, and welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. It is. Today we're going to talk about Supergirl, and well, you told me just now that you just saw the finale of Supergirl, and I know the last season will not be seen everywhere, so let's keep that as a spoiler alert.
Okay. Okay.
But what do you like about Supergirl in this series? We're talking about the Netflix series, of course, and well, what do you like about?
Do you get it on through Netflix? What here in the United States, we got it originally. It debuted on one of our networks on CBS, and then the next season, it was very successful. But the next season, it started on this what's called the CW, which is another channel, but is affiliated with CBS, and it moved its production to Vancouver, Canada, which is why some of the actors in the first season were unable to make that transition, like Alicia Flockhart, I believe it was, who played Cat Grant, didn't return. And so they had to write that in, and they had a few other storyline changes as a result. But I liked the show because I thought it was a relatively good adaptation from the comic book. I always liked, I'm a big comic book fan, and Supergirl was one of the comics that I read in my youth and continued to read here and there. I'm a big DC Comics and a big Marvel Comics fan. And I love to see when it gets translated to the big screen or the small screen. So I liked what they did with Supergirl. I thought it was well cast. I thought Melissa, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, Benoist. I thought she had done a very good job. We had previously seen Supergirl, of course. We saw, in a film back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And then we saw I can't think of her first name, but Bender who's a beautiful Supergirl in Smallville, but she was kind of a co-star, and we didn't get to really get into the character much. But I thought Melissa had done a very good job and was able to present Supergirl, one of the most powerful people on the planet, but with vulnerability. And I just like that fact. I think that's what made the show work to a great degree, because there was, she had a lot of problems adjusting to being Supergirl, and family issues with her half sister who was human, and it tied in with Superman, and they did bring in Superman as a character who has since spun off on his own show, which is kind of interesting that Supergirl being basically a spin-off character of Superman. In more recent times, the TV show spun off of her. So, and it surrounded her with a rather large cast, which I think was was good at the beginning, and as the 6 years of this show went on, I think became a problem, in my opinion. I think I think the show wound up um, as it should have. I mean, I'm not getting into the finale because we don't want to provide spoilers, but I think it concluded um, where it should have, because I think the writers were finding problems with the direction it was going in, and a lot of things just, I don't know. I think it had decent ratings to the very end, but I do think that some of the storylines just didn't jive as much with the fans. So
Yeah, and I think
I
one of the problems about that is because they used Supergirl also in a lot of crossovers of the other DC series like Arrow and what was the other ones? Oh, Flash.
Arrow and Flash and I think that was really great. I think that creating, within the CW universe, tying it all together. And originally Supergirl was within her own universe, and the Flash was in his own universe, or Flash and Arrow were in a separate universe. And I think by the very daring move of adapting the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was a very famous comic book storyline in the 1980s, and kind of like cherry picking certain aspects of that and making it, bringing all the universes together. And, I think that was a brilliant move, and it just put them all under, literally under the same umbrella, and was able to also alter certain things as well, to undo earlier continuity, but in a way that justified, the changes. So, including with Lex Luthor. And I think there was some very good high points of the series, but I also think at times the writers were trying to do a little too much in trying to make it contemporary. And when I say contemporary, I mean by some of the social issues of the day. And while I applaud efforts to bring, social issues into storylines, and have some further meaning, I also think that you can overdo it and to almost get a little preachy. And I think, especially, I think it started around the third season, fourth season. I think the writers really just hammered it a little too much. And I think it took away from some of the enjoyment and direction of the show, where we were still looking to see, Kara Danvers and the team there, being superheroes. And just there was a lot of storylines that I think were missed just with that. And I just think that the way it was handled sometimes was just not done as well as it could have. And I also think there were characters that they just didn't have a use for and didn't know what to do with. And James Olsen was one of them. They decided to make him the Guardian, and even then, I think that made things more interesting. But I don't think that ended up working either. And he himself decided to leave the show. And of course, one spoiler I'll give is he does make an appearance towards the end, in the finale. So,
Okay.
I don't think that's a big spoiler. I think we all know that towards, a lot of familiar faces are going to make it into the finale. Um, but by and large, I enjoyed the show. But usually when a show ends, I'm kind of sad. I didn't feel sad with the ending. I just felt like, okay, it was Supergirl's time. And it's open ended, so it's not like Supergirl can't return in any future crossovers. Maybe that's a spoiler too. But did we really think that Supergirl was going anywhere? Um, but I enjoyed the show, and it brought a lot of, interesting characters from the comics, and a few that weren't, in the comics to light. And so I would definitely recommend people to watch it, and keep an open mind. And as I said, I think we haven't seen the end of Supergirl.
No, well, if it is an open end, then probably she will be coming back.
I could see her making guest appearances. I mean, and just for those listening, the reason the show did end, and I think this was pretty widely publicized, was not because of the ratings, but because Melissa, during the course of the pandemic, had or maybe before the pandemic, had a baby. She's a mom now, and understandably wants to devote more time to being a mom. And I don't know if she lived in. I don't think she lived in Canada before the series, but probably didn't want to be living there as a mom, and probably commuting back and forth. I think that had something to do with the decision, and she decided it was her decision with the producers to conclude the show in its sixth season. And I think I think that coincided with was obviously her decision, and I think it was probably a good decision overall.
So which characters did you say were in the series but also in the comics?
Oh, well, they had it right off the bat. They had an interesting twist on the character of Red Tornado, who is a robot, or more like an android, but more robotic than an android. He was kind of a villain, and he's in the comics, and that was the first time we ever saw a live Red Tornado. Unfortunately, we never saw him again. He was only in one episode, and he ends up exploding. Of course, they could always bring him back, but they also had Lena Luthor, who was one of her close friends, but was always a very interesting character who, in the first several seasons, being Lex Luthor's sister, you didn't know if you could trust or not. And that was one intriguing part of the series, is that while she was Kara's good friend, and in a way Supergirl's good friend, you didn't know if she was going to turn, because she herself was put into situations where she was torn, and you didn't know which direction you would go. And then there was a whole one of the seasons, there was a betrayal because she felt hurt that Supergirl had revealed her secret identity to other people in her life, but not her, as her good friend. And so she felt kind of betrayed by that. And that was an interesting, those are the kind of storylines I think they should have continued on with, as opposed to some of the more social ones, or at least in the way that they presented them. But she had a good dynamic, and she was also very well cast. I'm afraid I don't know the name of the actress, but she was also Morgan Le Fay in the show Merlin.
Yeah.
And in many ways shares a lot of, in the case of Morgan Le Fay, in that show.
It's good that you're saying this, because it's good that you're saying this, because I also wanted to say that it was really recognizable when I saw Merlin, and I was thinking, hey, that's the same woman who played Lena Luthor, and her character is almost the same like when she played Lena Luthor. So that was really nice to see in a way. So for her, it wouldn't be that much of a change of acting in it.
Yeah, she was very good at being this smart, intelligent, and beautiful character who you didn't quite know whether to trust or not. And she conveyed that very well. Another character who I think we really didn't have in the comics, or at least not as much, was Alex, her half sister, who was, at first the deputy in charge of um, the agency that would be protecting the planet against, special threats, supervillains, and extraterrestrial threats. And Alex, you watched her develop over the years, and they delved a little bit into, obviously they delved into her sexuality as well, which was ironic because originally they were going to have her, um, in a relationship with, um, and I can't, I'm drawing a blank here because I'm talking. Um, they had introduced the same character who Wonder Woman battled in Wonder Woman 84. Lord.
Okay.
I can't think of his first name. Is it Jason or is it? But he had been introduced, and he was one of the casualties of the second season because he didn't want to go to Vancouver. So, and they went in a different direction with her, and they really explored the sister relationship back and forth.
Yeah, I think that is one of the strong points that they had in the whole series. It's also like what you said before is you have Supergirl, who is a heroine and defeat every villain that there is, but she also had the quote human side, and she has her own family issues and the emotions with it and etc. So I think that is one of the strongest points that they had in the series, because it's people can recognize and identify it with that.
Well, and they also brought in some interesting supporting characters, such as her. Her mother was played by the original Supergirl in the films. Her adopted father, rather, was played by Dean Cain, who was, Superman in Lois and Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And it was too bad that, he didn't come back, that they had kind of written him out. And I always, you never saw him die off screen, but you always hope that they'll bring, somebody like that back if they don't die on screen. And sometimes even when they do die on screen. But he was a good person to have. And they had Terry Garr, who played a villainess, and you had Kevin Sorbo, who was killed by Terry Garr in one of the early seasons, and they introduced the character of Mon-El, and they brought in the Legion of Superheroes, and a little bit different continuity from what I remember from my days of reading, Supergirl and Legion of Superheroes back in the 70s, was always that Brainiac 5, unlike Mon-El, was her love interest. And that wasn't the case here. They did something totally different, and they went more with Mon-El. And I thought that was an interesting romance, and I was wondering how they would resolve that, because you kind of know that Mon-El has to go into Back to the Future at some point, but they did something totally different, and I like that storyline with how they brought in Mon-El and how there was friction in the beginning and how they developed a romantic relationship and how that romantic relationship obviously changed and stuff like that. And and of course we have the first, well, it wasn't the first live Martian Manhunter. The first live Martian Manhunter, I believe, was Phil Morris, the son of well-known actor Greg Morris in Smallville. But they certainly utilized Martian Manhunter much better here, and they showed him a lot more as he's supposed to appear, as a Martian, as green. And I wish they had done it more so. There were some scenes where they just do it kind of halfway, and he still has his regular face or his human face. But I guess that they couldn't do it with a mask, and I guess they had to do it with CGI. and that's costly. So I always liked his uh, his place in the show, and always felt that if anybody, he should have gotten a spinoff, because I think there's so many things that you could do with his character.
Yeah,
Um,
that
and
would
he
be
could be played
awesome.
by anybody. That's the thing. They have perfect actor security, because cost wouldn't seem to matter. He could become anybody in appearance as a human. Um, and I just think there's so much that could be done with the Martian Manhunter. Of course, I would go in a different direction. I like the traditional John Smith, who was the Martian who had gotten broadcasts from Earth, and got hooked on old detective movies, and uh, wanted to be like the old timey 1950s Sam Spade, Mike Hammer kind of detective. And I think that would be rather interesting to see that done. Um, but the actor was that they do have playing him is very well, did a great job, and they gave him a different backstory, but one that still made a lot of sense and still didn't contradict, anything established by the Martian Manhunter. They brought in Martian Manhunter's family. They brought in his father. There was a touching scenes between he and his father. They did bring in the Miss Martian, um, making her a little older, because at first I was a little creeped out by the idea that what was supposed to be his niece was becoming a love interest for him. But it's a different take, and you have to go with the flow on that. So it was a little different. Um, and with Martians, they live several hundred years, if not longer than that. So I guess the age difference didn't really make much. But and let's see what other characters. Their take on Mr. Mixie-Pitalik, that's how I pronounce it, but I know it's sometimes it's Mix-Pitalik, but more time than not, it's Mixie-Pitalik. Um, was interesting. I was more of an ally than a pest, and also brought in the other character that we saw this season of Mixie, who was definitely not a friendly imp, or even a mischievous one. She was dangerous. So, they had done some interesting things, and they also recast her, Supergirl's cousin. I'm sorry, her aunt, in the first season, and the second season. I think she just wasn't available because she was doing a play or something, and they recast her, and was played by the actress. And usually these actor names are right on the top of my head, and today I'm just drawing a blank left and right. But the actress who played Lois Lane in Smallville. So that was also an interesting take. They had some really good actors that came into the show in various roles. So,
Yeah, I think
sorry.
so. It's just I think that is one of the reason also that it is like a success series, because if you don't have the actor who can tell the story, then it will not be a success.
Yeah, I think by and large, they were successful. I just think that perhaps towards the end, we were seeing a little bit too much of the other characters, and I think it got weighed down by some of these other storylines. Um, and I think it would have been better. Of course, we as fans always like to sit there and, you know, what Americans would call a Monday morning quarterback, and say, well, if I was doing this, I would do this. So I mean, and we're unfortunately not in that position, but as fans, we do this all the time, and we say, well, instead of doing that, why didn't they do this? Or really, did we need this side, this other storyline? Like, I thought they put a little bit too much, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I was getting a little tired about, all of Alex's romantic problems. There were times when I was even tired with Kara's problems, romantic problems. I was like, okay, I would rather see a little bit more action here, but then again, I'm a guy. Um, not to be in any way sexist, but there was times I was like, and there was a lot of crime scenes between sisters, and it was almost like getting to the point where, oh, this is at the point where the episode has this crying scene, and even my wife, who does not get into comic book, I've dragged her to a few movies,
Mm-hmm.
um, superhero based movies, and she drives me crazy because it was a Marvel movie, and I had brought her previously to Wonder Woman, and that she kept on saying, "When does Wonder Woman come in? When does Wonder?" I was like, "Honey, you're not going to see Wonder Woman. This is a Marvel movie, and that's DC." But anyway, she came down one day, and it was like saw one of the crying scenes, and then like 2 weeks later, came downstairs again while I was watching it and said, "Oh, you're watching Supergirl. This is the crying show, right?" So um, I do think that, in my opinion, I think there was a little bit too much of that, but maybe other fans disagree. That's just my view. I think I think that kind of fell into a pattern, you know.
Yeah, I
Um,
know what you mean.
but
I agree to that. It's just sometimes was a little bit too much.
I mean, I know comic books, and comic book based shows always lend themselves a little bit to some soap opera, and I understand that it usually adds to the show. But I think with Supergirl, they got into a rut. Um, I think one of the better things to happen towards the end of the show was their introduction of John Cryer as Luthor, and uh, well, some pronounce it Luthor, but I still remember the original 1960s Superman cartoon that always pronounced it that way, and that's gotten into my head. So, um, but I liked the way he played the character, and he had previously been in, I believe it was Superman 3, or was it the Superman 4? No, it had to be Superman 3 because Gene Hackman was back as Lex Luthor, and he played his Lex Luthor's nephew. So it was kind of ironic that he would, they brought him in to play Luthor himself, especially now that he was bald. So it was perfect, and I thought he was a good addition, and definitely ruthless and everything that you would expect from Luthor. So and Mixie this season was pretty devious. I thought they had some really good villains. Um, so overall, it had a good run, and you know, I just think that unfortunately it got into a few ruts.
So, is there a character that you like or can identify yourself with?
Hmm. Um. Well, I will say I felt bad for the character. I think the character that many of us might identify with, being a non superpowered one, was the character who was the Toyman's uh, son, who was originally working at Grant the Catco, where Kara works, and he was kind of the tech geek. Not that I am in any way a tech geek,
Mm-hmm.
but I just thought that he was this regular guy, and was, by virtue of the various storylines, got involved with everything that was happening with all these superpowered people, and he's helping them in the way he can help them with through his technical expertise, and gets involved in all these crazy situations that are way above you know his depth, and by little gets to be one of their top helpers, to the point where he gets, where he replaces Brainiac 5 and he goes off into the future. And that's how they did the transition and left Brainiac 5. So I think I could kind of identify with that, because I think he was supposed to be the audience. He was supposed to be that everyday guy that, like, look what's happening around us, kind of person. I loved Martian Manhunter, as I said before. And Mon-El, who was like the Superman who wasn't Superman, that he had powers but he wasn't sure how to use them. So I like that, and I also like, as far as male characters, I liked their interpretation of Brainiac 5. He's struggling to be
Yeah.
more human, and and he had failings, but failings and feelings, because he ended up betraying them at one point, in a way, because he didn't want to, because he felt trapped. He didn't know how to save them without actually having to compromise his values. So I thought that was an interesting take as well. So
I think that the so much drama between, or love drama between, of Alex Denver, but also of Kara, makes them say, I think, that there's also a human side of this all. And I think when they did that with Brainiac, is that I think they would like to show the people that it doesn't matter who you are or what you are, if you are an alien or if you come from Mars or whatever. Everyone has drama and everyone has those feelings, so it's normal.
yes, and I really think Supergirl tried very hard and did in fact accomplish the idea of addressing inclusiveness and and diversity. I mean, no one can say that show did not go full out in trying to present that theme, that you're not alone, that even with your differences, everyone has differences, be it gender, race, being from another planet. I mean, we saw even racial tensions within other alien species. It became known that aliens exist, and that they were having immigration issues. I mean, I think they went out of their way to parallel some issues that we have in, clearly in my country and throughout the world. And I think they did it very well. I think at times they hit you over the head with it. And I think sometimes you can get a message across being more subtle than you can with hitting you over the head. But I do applaud them for making a conscientious effort to do those kind of storylines, because it was definitely something different that we hadn't always seen, at least not to that extent, And I did like the storyline with Alex and and her partner wanting to have children. Well, first her first partner, who didn't want to have a child, and that was a real life storyline that in that sense I didn't mind there being a little bit of the romance issue, because it brought out something different, like how a character who's involved with any form of law enforcement, especially trying to protect the planet, also wants a real life and wants to have a life where they can be a parent, and a partner to someone. And it was interesting because Maggie, her girlfriend at the time, didn't want that. Wanted to marry her, but didn't want to have that, and that's something that many couples face. The decision of, we want to be a couple, but one may want to have a child and one doesn't, and that's not something you see addressed in many comic books, much less a comic book based TV series. So I thought that was interesting, and later on that storyline gets brought back up, and that's that's all I'll say about that if people haven't watched this season yet. But you know, I thought that was a interesting aspect to bring up.
I do also like the relationship Kara has with John, the Martian alien. Um, it was really, yeah, like I said, it's just he's an alien, but he becomes family.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and we got to see his family too, and it was, and his adopted family as well. The people around him, like Alex, like Kara, who becomes, and there's a very touching scene in the finale, which I won't go into, that does involve him, and you know, it's a very tender scene, and it works well. I won't say that some of the scenes where you well up and you cry aren't effective, because they were. There were some very good scenes over the years, where they touched emotions very, very well. Um, and we saw some interesting aliens over the years. I mean, we
yeah,
saw Linda Carter, Linda Carter playing, the president. And it was at an interesting time because, in my country at that time, we were having an election. And we thought very much that we might be having our first female president. And, in Supergirl, they had a female president who was also our first, you know, alien president, but we didn't know at the time. And we love, I remember, because in my country at that time, a very contentious time of who you're voting for, and I forgot what Linda Carter's uh, name was, character's name was, but I just kept on saying, that's who I'm voting for. I want to vote for Linda Carter. I want to vote for her for president. And then we found out that she was an alien. I said, well, I'd still vote for her as president. Outside of the other two real life candidates, uh, yeah, it was. And Bruce Boxleitner became the next president after that was discovered. Bruce Boxleitner being, well known as Commander Sheridan in Babylon 5,
yeah.
and of course in Tron, and you're probably too young to remember this, but he was also in, shortly after the success of Raiders of the Lost Ark. There were two TV shows patterned after the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and one of them was called Bring 'Em Back Alive, which was based on an actual real life person, and it was very Indiana Jones like, and Bruce Boxleitner was the the character, and his co-star from Tron, was the co-star. It was the co-star in that show, and yeah, so that was interesting. And he plays a bad guy in this one. He plays kind of a, corrupt, But no, they really cast well. I will say that.
Yeah.
I can't think of any, I don't. I think the actor who played James Olsen, I don't think that character worked. I'm not going to blame the actor himself. I just don't think they knew what to do with him when they wrote him, and I think they boxed him into a hole too. I always thought that they should have written him as John Irons, John Henry Irons, who's the character of Steel. Because one, he physically looked like him, and two, would have made him, much more interesting character to include in the series.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, they had Martian Manhunter sort of taking on that protector role of Kara, so perhaps that was not considered. And ironically, this season with the new Superman series that debuted, they did bring Steel into that show. So, we
But
finally got
I must say that I really did like the episodes with Superman in it, and it was really nice to see that also here you could see that they were cousins and that they have a lot in common, and they are the same Hayward Owick from Krypton.
Yeah, they did some great casting for that. I know a lot of fans loved his portrayal, the actor's portrayal of Superman, and anytime that he appeared, was just something a little special. And yet at the same time, Superman never quite outshined Supergirl in her own show.
Yeah.
So, to the point where I think they even had a battle and she won, which I thought was a little hokey, but then again, it was her show. But I thought that was very well done, very well cast, and a lot of people that I know who are fans of the CW superhero shows always told me they liked his portrayal of Superman more than the big screen version, and I can see that. And the new series that he's in, I has surprised a lot of fans in the direction that it went to, and has been a big hit. So while we won't have Supergirl this coming year, as on the small screen, at least not in her own series, we're happy to have Superman and Lois and their two kids.
I think we're almost at the end of the episode. Is there something you'd like to add?
No, I just encourage everyone to check out this season and see how they feel about the finale. Maybe they'll come away with it a little differently than I did. But I'm glad you gave me this opportunity to blabber on as long as I have, because it's been an interesting show for me that I recall, from start to finish. And while maybe I am a little sad that it's no longer there, but I do think that its time kind of came to a good conclusion. And and I'll for the most part, I have very fond memories of the series, and enjoyed it. So, looking forward to other CW translations from the comics and seeing what comes next.
Well, I do think that this show also empower little girls who are watching it to do and aspiring to do great things.
Yes, it did. Yes, and I guess I'm looking at it from the point of view of just a regular comics fan, but and the show always did try to, and I think accomplished, presenting that females, they're just as much, if not more so, heroines are just as important as the other heroes. And finally, Supergirl, although we had a Wonder Woman TV series and the Bionic Woman and some of the other earlier shows, but Supergirl, I think in many ways paved the way in the more current CW lineup to have shows like Stargirl and to have, Batwoman. And also, while Legends is more of an ensemble show, clearly Legends of Tomorrow, which could be the focus of a future show for you if you wish, has a lot of dominant characters who are female and who do an incredible job to make that show as fun as it is.
But when I was young and Supergirl the movie came out, I was really thinking, well, wow, there is a woman who has girl power. And she is I thought in that movie she was the niece of Superman. So, yeah, I was really empowered to. It was a lesson of girls can do things what boys can do too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And and I collected a lot of comics, especially in the '70s when I really started, and into the '80s and into the '90s, and maybe tapering off a little during the 2000s. But I do remember from all the many titles from both comic companies that I bought, comics from, um, that it didn't matter to me whether, like, I wouldn't not buy a comic because it had a female character in it. I just thought that, you could tell that it was written sometimes differently. Um, and I sometimes wondered why. I mean, clearly there was some differences, but I would pick up copies of things like, Spider Woman and She Hulk, and I think one of my favorites, one of the most, and I hope someday they bring her into the CW or a DC movie, is the obscure character of Black Orchid, who was a very mysterious character, and I thought that she was done very well, and another character who is a backup in the Lois Lane comic that I also bought back when Lois, this is early '70s when she had her own comic book. They had a backup character, a backup strip called Rose and the Thorn, who I always thought would make such an interesting character in. I always hoped they would bring her into Supergirl because she had a split personality. She didn't even know she was a super, and she didn't really have any superpowers. She was just, very athletic and had some extra gimmicks and stuff like that. But had, a split personality because her father was either a judge or a police officer who was killed, and she was, the shock of it all. And at times she would, but I don't know. I think that could have been handled sensitively these days with, but at the same time would make for a really cool character. Called, Rose, and she was Rose, and then she was the Thorn as the superhero, and so, or superhero, however you want to. Maybe someday we'll see it.
Yeah, we have to wait for that. Well, Bob, thank you for this lovely conversation. It was really nice to chat with you and hear about your opinion about Supergirl. And who knows till another episode?
I'm sorry? Who's the?
And maybe till another episode.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to be, I would love to be back for another episode to talk about, anything that you want. And I'm definitely a big follower of the CW superhero shows, but I'm a big Star Trek fan. I literally run a fan club in the United States here, a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association, and my club's the USS Challenger. So I'm a big fan of that, and I'm an all-around geek. So I'm a fan of a lot of things, and I, as you can tell, I have opinions on a lot of things. So
Yeah. Well, it was nice talking to you, and well, being in the atmosphere of Star Trek, live long and prosper.
Thank you. You as well. Happy holidays.
Dear listeners, I'd like to thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope you like it, and I try to be diverse as much as I can. Tell me what you think how I'm doing with this podcast. If you have any tips for me how I can do things better, let me know. If you'd like to talk about this episode or want to comment on this episode, you can reach out on Podbean, the Facebook group, the YouTube channel, and the Discord server of Original Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi. I also have a Twitter account especially for this podcast at OTFASP. Arena Talks Fantasy and Sci-Fi is also to listen, follow, and subscribe on Podbean, Spotify, Google Podcast, the Facebook group, and the YouTube channel. In the next episode, we will talk about sliders. I'm your host, Arinda. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.